Hi, I'm Christy. Welcome to Prayerful Flow. If this is your first time here, welcome. We're glad you're here. And if you've been here and taken this class before, we are glad you are back. So I'll take a couple of moments to explain what to expect in the class and talk about some items that might help you access today's practice in prayer. So in general, we read scripture at the beginning of class paired with some prayer and breath work. Then we move into some poses and movement and flow. And then we traditionally close class with either a guided prayer or another reading of scripture before some quiet moments in silence, shavasana, and God-loving presence. So to access today's class, I would invite you to maybe have a wall nearby. We won't be using it the whole class, but just for a couple of the poses. So just kind of a blank slate to help you at some point in the class. So again, not totally necessary, but something that might deepen your experience. The other thing you can use is if you have like a tall chair with a high back, that might be an option too. Another thing that may help you would be just a block or even a thick book, something firm that brings the earth up to you a couple inches. A rolled up towel or blanket would also suffice. Another item, again, not necessary, but you might find useful, would be a strap or even a belt from a robe, a scarf, something that just gives you support for some of the postures and stretches. So again, these are all not requirements, but invitations. So to begin today's class, I would invite you to come to a seated pose wherever you are. So if you have the wall nearby and you would like to use that to support your back while we listen to the readings, you are absolutely welcome to do that. If there's any pose you really find helpful to be in a position of receiving and reflecting on scripture, you can take that pose. But for intents and purposes of today's lesson, I would invite you to come to a seated pose. And if you'd like the earth raised just a couple inches, or like the sensation, or find more comfort in having your hips above your knees, sitting on a block or a blanket would be a good option too. So while you're getting ready and getting yourself comfortable and situated, I invite you to just draw your awareness to how you are feeling in the space you are in. So notice if anything is distracting you, like racing thoughts or like your to-do list. If anything's gripping, tense shoulders and neck, hips, knees, feet. Just notice anything that is just distracting you or nagging at you or is feeling cranky. And then without judgment, simply committing to letting that go in favor of presence on the mat, presence with God in prayer, and beginning to slow down and drawing your awareness to your breath. Notice the sound of your inhale, the sound of your exhale, maybe even sighing it out. Maybe as you begin to settle in, noticing the length of your inhale and the length of your exhale. And finally noticing the pace of your breath. Maybe it's short and choppy. Maybe you can imagine it slow and steady. Instead of like choppy waves like on the water during a storm, maybe you can picture gently rolling waves on a sunny day on the beach. And imagining your breath slow, steady, easy, gentle. Feeling controlled and held, calm and present. And then bringing to mind God's loving presence. Knowing that He is in all things, before all things, above all things. But we, in desire to have personal relationship with Him, we invite Him into our space. We welcome Him into our space, into our prayer, into our practice. And noticing any feelings or sensations that come up as you enter this place and space of prayer. I'm going to read our scripture passage. You're going to hear it twice. It is from Mark chapter 1, verses 21 to 28. The first time, I invite you to simply listen. Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at His teaching, for He taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere, throughout the whole region of Galilee. Go ahead and take a long inhale in. And slowly sigh it out. Maybe making any kind of adjustments, maybe switching the directions of your legs if that's calling to you. Maybe bringing some movement. Maybe shrugging your shoulders a couple times. This time I'm going to invite you, as you hear our reading a second time, I invite you to notice any word or phrase that is catching your attention. And then notice if that word or phrase is something that's bringing you consolation or peace or energizing you, or notice if it's bringing you some kind of challenge or resistance or confusion. And if that's the case, I invite you to simply ask God to soften your heart around that word or phrase or idea, because that could be the Holy Spirit at work too. Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at His teaching, for He taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this?" A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. His fame spread everywhere, throughout the whole region of Galilee. Notice any word or phrase that came to you or that is coming to you now. Simply observe and perhaps set it as an intention for your prayer and your practice today. Maybe in form of a statement or maybe in form of a question, or maybe just simply the repetition of the word. And then when you're ready, wherever you are, however you're seated, if you're on any props or using any props, I invite you to move them up to the side, unless in seated positions you prefer to sit on a blanket or have that height to your hips. That is perfectly fine. But if you were using the wall, maybe gently come away from the wall just to a seated pose on your mat, becoming the staff pose, extending your legs out in front of you. Noticing how it feels to change positions, or if you were seated on a prop maybe and now coming onto the earth, notice how that feels to sit in a more grounded place. Letting our spine be long, imagining like there's a string from the ceiling or the sky, kind of drawing from the top of our head, lengthening our spine. Inhaling your arms up to the sky, maybe even looking up to your fingertips. I invite you to just gently and slowly begin to draw your heart forward, keeping your spine long, keeping your legs active by flexing your feet, and allowing your hands to fall wherever they fall. We are not warmed up, so this is kind of our baseline assessment of our hamstrings. So how does it feel to gently begin stretching your hamstrings, maybe placing your hands on your shins or towards your ankles or even the tops of your knees. Again, we're protecting our low back. We're not like trying to collapse or overstretch or hyperextend. We're just collecting information here. So what does your first hamstring stretch feel like today? Take a few moments to breathe with the stretch, allowing it to evolve. Continuing to sit tall, begin to walk yourself back up to a neutral position. This time I invite you to spread your legs wide. So again, we're not looking to do the splits here this morning, but just collecting some baseline information for as we start our practice. So however wide feels like it's not causing you any kind of pain or pinching, but just enough of a stretch that you notice it. So flexing your feet, both feet, removing any flesh away from your sits bones, again, sitting tall, maybe even shrugging your shoulders onto your back body. Inhale your arms up to the sky, and this time still leading with your heart coming forward, drawing your arms forward, and letting your hands fall where they may. Just noticing what you notice. Again, keeping both feet active. And notice how the stretch, the changed, adjusted posture might feel a little bit different. Notice where it feels different. Keeping your core engaged so you're not collapsing into your low back or dumping your shoulders forward. We're keeping our spine long. We're still sitting tall. Breathing through the stretch. Noticing if anything kind of softens as we still keep our legs active, our core active. And similar as before, inhale, gently walking yourself back up to a neutral position, sitting tall. This time bring the soles of your feet together. Now bend to your knees, coming to seated bound angle. So again, the soles of our feet are touching, our knees are wide. Sitting tall, inhaling your arms to the sky, and exhaling, coming forward. Notice what you notice, even option to Bend inward, folding down. Breathing, pausing here for a few rounds of breath. And as you begin to walk back up, maybe drawing the soles of your feet a little more inward, bringing your hands to your ankles, I invite you to just, for a few rounds of breath, begin to bounce your knees gently up and down. So kind of like fluttering wings, just really gently at the pace you want. Maybe it feels better to just move slowly, subtly, but just kind of waking up our hips, our inner groin, continuing to sit tall and breathe. After your next full round of breath, find stillness. Bring your knees together. And however you would like to get there, I will meet you in hands and knees on our mat. Maybe just rolling off to the side. Clearing any props out of the way. Won't need them right away. So just checking in tabletop pose. Are your hips in line over your knees? Are your shoulders over your elbows, over your wrists? Are you noticing that you're favoring one side versus the other, or is your weight evenly distributed from left to right? Your gaze is down, and let's just begin to take a couple rounds of cat-cow pose to the pace of our own breath. So your exhale is cat pose, where you're pressing your shoulders away from you towards the ceiling, curling your back, tailbone curls towards the floor, releasing your neck, maybe even shaking your head out yes and no if that feels right for you. And then on your inhale, your belly drops, your heart lifts, your gaze lifts. Drawing your chest forward and lifting for cow pose. So let's just move to the cat and cow rotations that you need to begin waking up your spine, bringing some movement to your back, to your hips, to your shoulders, releasing tension from your neck. And noticing the freedom you feel as you begin to move fluidly through the pose to the pace of your own breath. And then when you're ready, find stillness. Walk your hands forward, one handprint, curl your toes, lift your seat. Let's come to our first downward facing dog. So again, same thing, even though we're taking a pose that has a very specific posture, we have lots of options to kind of make it our own. So bending and straightening our legs, maybe gliding forward into plank and sinking our hips back up to downward facing dog. Lifting, it wasn't really sinking. And checking in, noticing when you shift your body into a different posture, what shifts in your perspective, your thoughts, your breathing. Look between your hands. Walk your feet up towards your hands, coming into a forward bend. And again, slowly noticing as we come into this pose, like bringing our awareness to it, paying attention. What happened when we got here? Like, how do your hamstrings feel? Are your legs feeling any kind of tightness? If so, just keeping a bend to your knees. How does your neck feel? Maybe shaking your head out, yes and no. How do your shoulders feel? Letting everything come forward and be heavy towards the mat. On an inhale, let's use our breath to lift up halfway, drawing our shoulder blades onto our back. On an exhale, we let it all go. And then slowly on an inhale, let's rise to stand. Really rooting into the earth, pressing our feet into the earth, drawing our shoulders onto our backs, coming into a mountain pose. And again, checking in, drawing our core in, our belly button draws towards our spine. We lift our hearts, but we're not popping our rib cage out and straining our back. Our chin is tucked in. Again, this is our first standing pose, so notice a shift in perspective. How do you feel in standing? How do you feel in the space that you're in? What do you notice? On an inhale, let's sweep our arms towards the sky, maybe even looking to our fingertips. And then let's exhale by folding through heart center. Letting our hands plant to the mat, stepping back to a plank pose or modified plank pose. Holding, building some heat. Lowering all the way onto our bellies, maybe knees, chest, and chin. Keeping your hands next to your rib cage, your elbows drawn to your sides. Feeling the tops of your feet on the mat or the earth. Again, inhaling energy, drawing up from the tips of your toes, engaging your core, engaging your glutes, and beginning to lift your heart and your head, coming into a baby cobra. Let's exhale that down together. Let's draw up 2 more times. Just bringing in some gentle, steady movement. Just like that cat and cow, that same flow and movement to the pace of our own breath. Lowering your forehead to the earth. We'll meet in downward facing dog. You can press all the way up or come through hands and knees, whichever you prefer. Notice what you notice and notice what feels right as you are moving your body and shifting from place to place. So returning to downward facing dog, I invite you to lift your right leg long, extending for 3-legged dog, pressing out through the bottom of your foot, extending, stretching, staying here for a full, long round of breath. And then with your exhale, lowering your right leg back down to meet your left. Let's do the same with our left leg. So inhale your left leg long for 3-legged dog. Stretching, stretching, stretching. Let your inhale lengthen, pressing the sole of your foot like it could reach the ceiling. And then exhaling, left foot meets right. Look between your hands. Walk your feet towards your hands, coming into a forward fold. This time maybe taking a bind. Maybe that feels right. Opposite hands to opposite elbows. Letting your head and your neck and your shoulders be heavy as though you're spilling out any weight or tension that you're carrying and releasing it to the earth. Again, noticing how your legs are feeling now that we've begun moving them. Do you still need to keep that deep bend, or are you able to lengthen, maybe bending one leg, one knee, and straightening the other, and noticing how that feels? If your hands are in the bind, release them to the earth. Begin to draw your weight into your right foot. Step your left foot back, bringing your knee to the mat, coming into a low lunge. If you have a blanket or a block, maybe this is a time when you want to pad your knee. You can also fold your mat up, bringing an extra layer of cushioning to your knee if that feels like that's something you need. So again, just checking in our low lunge. Is our knee in line with our ankle? We're not like bending forward. Also tracking your knee forward. Your toes are pointing in the direction towards the short edge of your mat, and your knee is tracking that same way. So framing your foot, your front foot, with your two hands, and notice what you notice. Maybe you need to wiggle your back knee back an inch or two at a time, just as the pose evolves, as you breathe into the pose. And let's add some flow here. So when we exhale, we're going to begin to sink our hips back towards our back foot, pop our right toes up, straightening our front leg, coming into a modified half splits. So then our inhale, we're going to come forward. Our exhale, come backwards. Our inhale comes forward. And then on the third time, our exhale comes back, and let's stay in the hamstring stretch for just a couple rounds of breath. And again, noticing what you notice. And next inhale, begin to walk your way back to the low lunge. Lift up your back leg. Bring forward to meet your right leg, returning back to our forward fold. On an inhale, we lift halfway. Exhale, returning to forward fold. Inhale, let's rise to stand. Exhale your hands to heart center, coming into a mountain pose. Pausing here in mountain pose, your eyes can be closed or your gaze can be down, or maybe just looking at something that is not moving. Bring to mind your word or phrase or intention from the beginning of class, or notice any word or phrase that's coming to you now. And just pausing, noticing if anything has shifted or changed since we've begun moving. And an inhale, sweep your arms open, looking to the sky, exhaling, folding all the way through heart center, releasing your hands to the mat, stepping back either to a downward facing dog or taking an option to flow through here. So flowing through plank and lowering, taking what you need. Coming back to downward facing dog, again, noticing what you notice, noticing if anything is changing or getting easier or getting more difficult as we warm our bodies up and add more movement. On an inhale, look between your hands, walk between your hands. Coming back to a forward fold. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, sigh it all out. On an inhale, step your right leg back. Should know where we're going now. Making any adjustments, beginning to prepare yourself for low lunge on the opposite side. Lowering your right knee to the earth. Framing your front foot, your left foot with your hands. Pausing here. Noticing what you notice. Maybe it feels different on this side. And let's wake up our hamstrings by coming into that flow. So on our inhale, we sink our hips back, popping up our left toes, straightening our left leg. Our hips come all the way towards our right heel. And then inhale, back to low lunge. Exhale. Inhale one more time, low lunge. And then with this exhale, we're going to draw all the way back and pause here, stretching our left leg, our left hamstring for a couple rounds of breath. On an inhale, coming forward, again, curling your toe, lifting your back leg, this time stepping your left leg back to downward facing dog. Pausing here for a moment, taking what you need. Again, maybe it's hovering your knees to the earth and lifting your seat to downward facing dog. Maybe it's moving in and out of plank pose to downward facing dog. Taking a few moments of self-expression in this pose. On an inhale, finding stillness wherever you are. Inhaling your right leg to the sky for three-legged dog. This time option to bend, twist, and open. Again, keeping your shoulders square to the mat. You're really just stacking your hips. Returning your leg to three-legged dog. And this time let's step through. So drawing your knee in through your chest, stepping forward, and this time lowering your knee for low lunge. And let's move through that a little quicker since we know where we're going. So inhaling, low lunge, exhale, half splits. Inhale, low lunge, exhale, half splits. Inhale, low lunge, exhaling, half splits. Pausing here to breathe and stretch. This time drawing your right leg back to meet your left. Sinking your hips towards your heels, coming into a modified hero pose. So coming back to kneel, maybe bringing your hands to heart center, pausing here for a moment, and then drawing your knees wide, keeping your toes together. Walk yourself down to a child's pose. Pausing here, checking in. Remaining here for a few rounds of breath. Maybe bringing to mind the idea of a new way of doing things. breaking the status quo. And then inhale, begin to walk your hands back up, bringing your knees together, coming back to that modified hero's pose. So our hips are at our heels, maybe pausing for a round of breath with hands to heart center. And then when you're ready, begin to walk your hands back to hands and knees, one handprint extended, curling your toes, lifting your seat, downward facing dog. So this time from downward facing dog, you know where we're going. So extending your left leg long for three-legged dog. Option to bend, twist, and open here. So you're bend, twisting, opening, stacking your hips if that feels right to you. If you're in the bind, returning your leg to three-legged dog, squaring your hips to the mat, drawing your left knee in through your chest, stepping through, setting up for low lunge on the opposite side by letting your right knee come down to the mat, checking in your alignment, knee is over ankle. And then again, we're gonna breathe through to half splits. So we inhale, then exhale, half splits. Inhale, low lunge. Exhale, half splits. Inhale, low lunge. Exhale, half splits. Pause here. Notice what you notice. Keeping your toes, front toes flexed, keeping your leg active. And then on your next inhale, drawing your left foot back, coming onto both knees, coming in modified hero's pose. Bringing your knees wide, sinking down into child's pose for a moment. Take a long inhale in through your nose, sigh it out through your mouth. Let's do that one more time. Inhale through your nose, exhale, sigh through your mouth. Begin to walk yourself back up, drawing your knees together, coming into hero's pose. This time shrugging your shoulders a few times before drawing your hands to heart center. Pausing here. Walking your hands back out to table. Again, moving your hands up, one handprint, coming up to downward facing dog. With an option to take one more flow through if you so desire. So coming to flow through, you would just glide forward into plank, lower your way, knees, chest, and chin, or chaturanga. Coming into the back bend of your choice. And returning back to downward facing dog. From downward facing dog, lower your knees to the mat. And come into a seated pose once again. So this time, extending your legs long. I'm gonna turn a little for instructional purposes. Again, maybe you need a block or blanket to sit on if that serves you. Pulling any flesh away from your sits bones, activating your feet. This time inhaling your arms up to the sky and leading with your heart, bending forward. Noticing, taking some inventory. Noticing how the pose has changed since we took that first hamstring stretch, this first seated forward bend this morning, and noticing if anything has shifted, if this pose has become more or less accessible to you, and taking what you need to make any adjustments. On an inhale, begin to walk your spine back up to a neutral seated pose. And then as you remember, this time widening your legs to whatever feels comfortable to you, flexing your feet, inhaling your arms to the sky, exhaling, drawing your heart forward. And again, notice any differences or shifts. Maybe you have more mobility, maybe you have more tension. Respond to what your body is telling you, both in terms of permission or limitations. On your next inhale, begin to walk yourself back up to a neutral pose, and this time bringing the soles of your feet together. I'm going to invite you to some different options for our next pose. So again, this is about making it accessible to you. So listen to your body and know what it needs. So our first option would be to take this posture in bound angle. So if this feels really good to you, the next step I would invite you to do is bring the sole of your right foot to the mat, and bending your right knee, bringing your heel towards as close to your sits bones as possible. And notice what shifted. You should really still feel both sit bones and both hips even on the mat. This is also, I should have said this, where you might want to have a strap handy for you. So sitting here, I invite you to take your right arm, reach on the inside of your right shin, cross your hand over by your right ankle, and wrap your hand around the outside of your right foot, so the pinky toe edge of your right foot. Next, bring your left hand to the inside, so your arch of your right foot. So the next thing we're going to do is begin to lift and straighten our leg. So we're coming into modified heron pose. So again, just as slowly and gently as we stretched our hamstrings all through class, begin to bend and straighten your leg. So what you should be seeing, I'm gonna adjust, is you can see I'm not like crunching forward trying to reach into this pose. My spine is long and neutral. I still have a slight bend to my leg, and I can feel that the accessibility of the stretch all the way down my leg. Really intense stretch for my hamstring, but we warmed our hamstrings up a lot, so this should be more accessible to you. If this is challenging to bring your foot up, this is where the strap, you can place the strap across the ball of your foot and add some length. And notice, you might want to do both just to play with the freedom and make it more of a heart opener, because heron pose is good for both heart opening, cardiovascular health, because we're lifting our hearts and we're holding this stretch. It's also a really deep hamstring release and stretch. And by keeping our legs in how we sit for seated bound angle, it can make the pose more accessible to people. So after you've held the pose for, 5 to 8 rounds of breath, maybe begin to bend your knee, releasing the posture. And again, unwinding your legs, maybe just straightening them out, shaking any tension out. Maybe windshield wipering from side to side if you like that. And then let's set up and prepare to do that to the opposite side. So again, coming into bound angle legs, we bring the sole of our left foot to the mat, to the earth, drawing our heel towards our left sits bones, and we're making sure our pelvis is equally anchored into, so both sides of our hips are equally anchored into the earth. If they're not, that might be where some padding like a block or a blanket can even things out for you, but you should really feel both hip bones rooted into the earth. So again, left hand reaches on the inside of our leg, crosses over our foot, left hand to outside of left foot, right hand to inside of left foot, and then begin to lift slowly, straightening your leg, keeping your spine long, and just noticing what you notice in the stretch. Breathing, noticing if this side feels any different, and maybe playing with the prop if you have one, and noticing how that changes or evolves the pose for you. And again, you're not collapsing forward, you're more almost even sitting. If you're moving in any direction, it would be backward, almost like that same sensation of boat pose, rather than coming forward and yanking yourself into the posture. But breathing with the freedom of mobility and space in your heart, space in your hamstrings. And then when you're ready, bringing a bend to your knee to release the pose, and then taking some kind of counter action to release the tension from your legs and your hips. So then, once you're ready and have completed your modified heron pose, I invite you to prepare for our final resting pose, and I'd like to give some options. This is where the wall comes in. So you could take a traditional Shavasana laying on your mat if that is what's calling to you right now. Another option would be, this is where the wall comes in. So you would bring your hips, like my right hip is right up against the baseboard of the wall, coming into legs up the wall. So literally, I'm sending my legs up the wall, laying on my back. My sits bones are at the baseboard where the floor meets the wall. And you can remain here for a really great option in legs up the wall. If you still haven't had enough action or opening of your hips, I would invite you to take frog on the wall. So this is where you would bring the outside edges of your feet towards the wall. So, and then bending your knees like you're coming to a happy baby pose, really like happy baby on the wall rather than frog on the wall. But your knees are wide, and again, looking at your ankles in line with your knees. And just letting this evolve with your breath. So maybe that feels like a great option for you. And as we're transitioning to our final reading, if you wanted to stay in one of these poses on the wall for a few moments and rounds of breath, and then transition to a Shavasana, you have that option. So take what you need in these moments as we prepare to close our practice. I will be preparing for our third round of our reading. So wherever you are, or wherever you want to be, whether it's Shavasana or legs up the wall or frog on the wall, begin to draw your awareness back to your breath, back to God's loving presence. Back to the idea of teaching with authority and Jesus bringing a new way of doing things, a new way of learning, a new way of living, a new way of loving. Maybe allowing any feelings of gratitude that inspires. Allowing your breath to be easy and light. We'll listen to our passage one more time. They came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this?" "A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. Allow any words or phrases that came to you or are coming to you now, perhaps offering them up in a prayer of praise, in a prayer of gratitude, or a prayer of petition and request. Take a few moments in prayer before settling into the silence of God's presence. If you'd like to extend your Shavasana for a few more moments, feel free to pause the video here. Otherwise, bring your awareness back to your breath, back to the room or the space that you're in. Beginning to make small movements with your hands and feet or your fingers and toes. Maybe taking a full body stretch by reaching your hands up overhead and stretching from the tips of your fingers to the tips of your toes. Maybe even hugging your knees into your chest. When you're ready, roll on to whichever side is calling to you, savoring a few more moments of God's warm embrace in this prayerful practice. And then when you're ready, begin to use your strength to draw yourself back up to a seated position on the mat. Bringing your hands to heart center,